Betrayed and left to die. How a human hero defied the odds and changed everything. The desert on Charon 9 was as silent as death itself. An endless sea of sand stretched beneath an orange sky, thick with the weight of radiation storms that rolled across the horizon like slow-moving thunder. The land was dead, once a battleground, now nothing more than a forgotten graveyard. The heat from the sun burned through the atmosphere, scorching everything in its path. Syria Valk, the former commander of the Viral Dominion, lay half-buried in that unforgiving desert. Her once pristine armor was shattered and torn, pieces of it scattered around her like broken remnants of a long-lost war. She could feel the desert closing in on her, its dry, hot breath suffocating her already weakened body. Every breath she took burned like fire, her chest tight and painful. Her left arm was useless, twisted at an unnatural angle, and her leg was trapped beneath a massive piece of armor and shattered glass. Her vision flickered between light and darkness. The world spun. She could feel the sand beginning to creep over her, ready to swallow her whole. She was alone, left to die. The Dominion had no use for her anymore. Once she had been one of their fiercest commanders, a shield-bearer, feared by all who knew her name. But that was before she had refused to carry out the orders to exterminate a human colony. They had called her a traitor, a threat to the Dominion, and so they had made their decision, to dispose of her. No trial, no explanation, just a death sentence. The last thing she remembered was the sound of her escape craft being shot down by her own unit, the roaring explosion that followed. Then silence, the silence of space, then the fall. And now this, the slow, agonizing death beneath the desert sun. But the desert did not scream when it killed her. It was patient, waiting for her to fade into oblivion. And Syria was sure that she was fading. She had fought for so long, given everything to her people. But now she was nothing. Her chest heaved, each breath more shallow than the last. And then, just as the darkness began to overtake her, she felt something she had never expected in this forsaken place. A vibration beneath the sand. It was subtle at first, almost imperceptible, but then it grew stronger. A hum, a steady rhythm that shook the ground. Syria opened her eyes, her silver gaze scanning the horizon. Her heart skipped a beat. There, emerging from the haze of dust and heat, was a figure, a human. He was tall, his movements slow but deliberate. He was wrapped in tattered clothing and scavenged armor, and a reflective visor shielded his face. His steps were measured, his presence calm amidst the chaos. He didn't hurry, he didn't seem afraid. He just walked toward her, unfazed by the danger that surrounded them. Syria's heart raced, her body tensed despite her injuries. Instinctively, she searched for a weapon, but her hands only found sand and rubble. She had nothing. And yet, the human did not raise a weapon. He did not run. He simply came closer. Easy, his voice echoed in the silence, low and steady. You're safe, as much as anyone can be out here. Safe? Syria almost laughed, but the sound came out as a painful cough. Safe in the middle of the desert with no way to escape? Safe when the Dominion would come for her soon to finish the job they had started? The human knelt beside her slowly, his movements gentle but purposeful. I'm not Dominion, he said, as if reading her thoughts. I'm not here to finish the job. Syria's silver eyes flickered with confusion. Why would a human help her? She had been trained to fight them, to see them as nothing more than weak, unpredictable creatures. The Dominion had always made her believe that humans were beneath them. And yet, here was one, standing before her, offering help instead of death. It didn't make sense. Her mouth was dry, and she struggled to speak. Only dust and blood escaped her throat. The human cursed under his breath and moved closer. He gently touched her shoulder, his fingers surprisingly warm despite the harsh cold of the desert. He pulled out a small device from his belt, something she recognized as a medical scanner. The screen flickered to life, casting a soft light in the darkness of the bunker. You're dying, the human said bluntly, his voice low but steady. But not yet. Syria's mind was reeling. Why would he care? Why was he helping her? She tried to force words from her mouth, but they didn't come. The world was closing in. Her vision was slipping away. And yet, something inside her, a small flicker of hope, stirred. Why? She whispered. The human paused for a moment, his face hidden behind the visor. Then, slowly, he removed it, revealing a face weathered by the harsh realities of life. His dark eyes met hers, tired but sharp. He had seen things, Syria realized. Things far darker than the desert, darker than the war that Syria had known. "My name is Elias Ran," his voice said, soft yet resolute. "And I don't leave people to die just because someone else says they deserve it." Syria's heart skipped a beat. She had expected anger, fear, hatred, but there was none of that, just a quiet strength, a kind of resolve that made her feel for the first time in hours, like maybe, just maybe, she wasn't truly alone. The desert might have claimed her, but this human, this stranger, was offering her something she hadn't expected. A chance to live. The storm howled outside. The world beyond the bunker was still, but the fight wasn't over. Not yet. And Elias was right. Syria wasn't going to die today. Not if she could help it. The war, she realized, was far from over. And maybe, just maybe, the humans she had once feared were the key to winning it. The humans passed. The walls of the bunker were old, their rusted metal panels creaking under the weight of the sandstorm outside. The air was stale, the hum of forgotten machines filling the silence. Syria's eyes fluttered open, the dull pain in her side pulling her from unconsciousness. She was no longer lying in the blistering heat of the desert, but tucked on a cot, the cold metal of the bunker around her. Her armor had been stripped away, replaced with clean bandages and the soft hum of medical technology. Her mind was still hazy, her body a patchwork of dull aches and sharp pangs of pain. She blinked slowly, the dim lights above flickering as her vision cleared. She was alive, not dead, not forgotten in the sand. Sitting nearby, Elias was working in the corner of the room, his hands steady as he prepared old human tech, his thoughts somewhere far beyond the walls of the bunker. Syria, still recovering from her wounds, sat on a cot in the corner of the room, her mind spinning. She was alive, yes, but she couldn't shake the feeling that her survival had come at a price. The Dominion didn't let their enemies go unpunished. They would come for her. They always did. The question was, would they come for Elias too? Syria's mind raced, but Elias didn't seem concerned. He moved with the calm assurance of someone who had lived through chaos and come out the other side. But then, as if summoned by her thoughts, a deep, low vibration rolled through the floor. It was subtle at first, like a faint tremor beneath her feet, but then it grew stronger. A hum, a steady rhythm that shook the ground. Syria opened her eyes, her silver gaze scanning the horizon. Her heart skipped a beat. There, emerging from the haze of dust and heat, was a figure, a human. He was tall, his movements slow but deliberate. He was wrapped in tattered clothing and scavenged armor, and a reflective visor shielded his face. His steps were measured, his presence calm amidst the chaos. He didn't hurry, he didn't seem afraid. He just walked toward her, unfazed by the danger that surrounded them. Syria's heart raced, her body tensed despite her injuries. Instinctively, she searched for a weapon, but her hands only found sand and rubble. She had nothing. And yet, the human did not raise a weapon. He did not run. He simply came closer. "Easy," his voice echoed in the silence, low and steady. "You're safe, as much as anyone can be out here." Safe? Syria almost laughed, but the sound came out as a painful cough. Safe in the middle of the desert with no way to escape? Safe when the Dominion would come for her soon to finish the job they had started? The human knelt beside her slowly, his movements gentle but purposeful. "I'm not Dominion," he said, as if reading her thoughts. "I'm not here to finish the job." Something was coming. The scanner on Elias's workbench buzzed to life, its flickering screen lighting up in a dim blue glow. He glanced at it, then at Syria. There was no panic in his eyes, no urgency, just that same quiet determination. "They're here," Elias muttered. His voice was calm, too calm, but Syria could feel it, the tension in the air, the shift that told her everything had just changed. "They're close," Elias added, his voice lowering. "Reclaimers." Syria's blood went cold. The Reclaimers, elite hunters from the Dominion, cold, methodical, and merciless. Their only purpose was to track down and eliminate enemies of the Dominion. No trial, no mercy. She had seen them before, in battle, in the darkness of war. They were the things nightmares were made of. And now they were coming for her. She stood up, the sharp pain in her side making her wince, but she ignored it. Her muscles burned from the effort, but her mind was focused, her body moving on instinct. She grabbed a scrap blade from the nearby table, the cold metal comforting in her grip. "They'll tear this place apart," she said, her voice low, almost a growl. "The reclaimers don't leave anything alive." Elias didn't answer right away. He didn't need to. He was already moving, pulling out something from beneath the workbench. A piece of old metal mesh, some nails, a small power cell. Syria blinked, confused. Was he really going to try and fight them with this? "You're building a trap," she said, her voice flat with disbelief. Elias didn't answer, but there was a small smile on his lips. Not just a trap. 3. Syria couldn't help but laugh, even though the sound was raw and weak. The idea of stopping the reclaimers with primitive human technology, old, broken, scavenged pieces, seemed absurd. But there was something about the way Elias worked, his calmness, his focus. It made her wonder if he knew something she didn't. "You're mad," she muttered, but there was respect in her tone. "Yeah," Elias said with a small grin, "but I'm good at it." The sound of footsteps outside the bunker door made Syria's heart race. She knew those steps. They were too precise, too quiet. Not the heavy thud of infantry boots, but something far more dangerous. Something that moved like a predator. The reclaimers were here. Elias was already at the door, checking the traps he had set. The first one, a simple electrical shock mine, was hidden just in front of the door. He placed another near the sidewall, ready to be triggered. The third one, a larger device, would activate when the reclaimers crossed into the inner hallway. It was a last resort, designed to make them angry. And angry hunters, Elias knew, were dangerous. Syria felt the cold weight of her own weapon in her hands, her grip tightening. She had never been afraid of death, but the reclaimers were different. They didn't just kill, they erased. Every moment that passed brought them closer, their presence overwhelming, suffocating. Then came the voice. It wasn't loud, but it was clear. The words, though translated through the old speakers, were cold and calculating. "Syria Valk, you have been found." Syria's breath caught in her throat. It was the voice of Reclaimer Prime, the leader of the hunt, the one who would make an example of her, show the Dominion what happened to traitors. She stood straight, her posture rigid. This was it. This was the moment she had feared. Elias looked at her. "They know you. They've come for you," he said. His voice was steady, but there was a glint of understanding in his eyes. He wasn't afraid. He wasn't even worried. He was ready. Syria nodded. "Reclaimer Prime," she said, her voice sharp. "He won't stop until I'm dead." Elias smirked. "Yeah, well, I'm not exactly known for making things easy." The door to the bunker rattled, the sound of metal grinding against metal as something outside began to cut through. A cutting torch. The reclaimers were coming in. Syria grabbed Elias's arm, pulling him back into the shadows of the bunker. "We need to move," she whispered urgently. But Elias didn't move. Instead, he took a slow, deliberate step forward, his hand going to the control panel near the door. "Stay quiet. They'll step right into it." Syria hesitated, unsure of what Elias was planning, but before she could protest, he pushed a button, and the first reclaimer stepped over the threshold. The trap was sprung. The electrical shock mine detonated with a violent crack, sending a surge of blue-white electricity through the air. The first reclaimer's body jerked, armor sparking as he stumbled back, slamming into the wall. But the other two were faster. They raised their weapons, scanning the room, already calculating their next move. Elias grabbed Syria's arm. "Run," he said simply. And they did. The human defense. The moment the door crashed open, the world shifted. Wind and sand exploded into the bunker, like a violent storm unleashed from the depths of hell. The reclaimers stormed in, their tall forms moving with predatory grace, their armor sleek and dark, reflecting the orange glow of the storm outside. They were not human, not even close. Their red-tinged visors glowed like cold embers, scanning the room with unblinking precision. Syria's heart raced. Every instinct she had as a soldier told her to fight, to defend, to kill. But the pain in her side and the weakness in her limbs reminded her that she was not the same warrior she had been hours ago. Her mind screamed at her to fight, but her body betrayed her. The reclaimers would tear her apart. Elias, however, was calm. A calm that felt wrong, as if the chaos of battle didn't faze him. His eyes locked on the reclaimers as they advanced, but instead of fear, there was something else in them, something sharp and calculating. He wasn't just surviving, he was controlling the situation. Syria wanted to ask what he was doing, but there was no time. The first reclaimer stepped forward, and Elias didn't hesitate. A low, mechanical whine cut through the air. The first shot rang out, echoing through the bunker. But instead of striking the reclaimer, it slammed into the overhead light fixture, sending sparks flying. The reclaimer didn't flinch. It didn't even blink. It just kept advancing. Sirius' breath caught in her throat. This was it. Elias had made his move, and the reclaimers were too strong. They were elite, unstoppable. But Elias didn't retreat. He didn't back down. He fired again, but this time he wasn't aiming at the reclaimer. His shot hit the ceiling above them, causing a massive metal panel to fall and crash down between the reclaimer and the rest of them. For a split second, the room was filled with the deafening sound of falling debris. That was all the time they needed. Elias grabbed Siria's wrist, yanking her toward the side corridor with surprising strength. "Move!" he barked. His voice was harsh, but there was no panic in it, only the urgency of a man who knew what had to be done. Siria's legs burned, but she ran. Her body screamed in protest, but she refused to stop. They darted through the narrow passageway, and behind them she heard the unmistakable sounds of the reclaimers tearing through the fallen debris, their advanced technology slicing through metal with ease. They were close. The corridor twisted and turned, a maze of old human infrastructure that had long since been abandoned. The walls were cracked, the floor uneven, but Elias moved like he had memorized every inch of it. He knew these tunnels. He knew how to survive. They reached the junction, and Elias slammed his hand into a control panel, activating a massive steel hatch that dropped with a heavy thud, sealing off the corridor. For a moment, there was silence, just a sound of their ragged breathing and the distant, angry footsteps of the reclaimers. Elias leaned against the hatch, his hand still gripping the weapon tightly. He glanced over at Syria, his eyes narrowed, calculating. "They'll come through this hatch," he said softly, more to himself than to her. Syria didn't reply. She was still trying to catch her breath, her heart pounding in her chest. Her side ached and the adrenaline was starting to wear off. But she knew what he was thinking. They were out of time. The sound of claws scraping against metal echoed through the junction. The reclaimers were relentless, and they were getting closer. "They're too fast," Syria whispered, a bitter edge to her voice. "We can't outrun them. We need a plan." Elias didn't answer immediately. He was already at the workbench again, rifling through tools and broken tech, his hands moving with practiced ease. His eyes flicked between the door and the cluttered surface of the workbench. Syria watched him, her mind racing. What was he doing? They had no time. The reclaimers were almost here. Then she saw it. Elias had grabbed a handful of nails, a battery, and some scraps of metal mesh. It was primitive, simple, and yet it was something she had never expected from a human. The weapon he was crafting wasn't meant to kill, it was meant to slow the reclaimers down. "You're building another trap," Sirius said with a flat voice, but there was a spark of something in her chest, something she hadn't felt in a long time. Hope. Elias nodded without looking at her. "Angry hunters make mistakes. I'm not going to stop them, but I can make them slip up." Syria's eyes narrowed. The reclaimers didn't make mistakes. They were perfection in motion. But Elias wasn't like the minion. He wasn't thinking about defeating them with brute strength. He was thinking like a survivor. And survivors, Syria knew, fought in ways that made even the strongest hesitate. He finished his device quickly, his hand steady. "This'll give us a window," he said, setting the trap down carefully. It was crude, a small mesh of metal and wires, but it would work. The door to the junction shook. The reclaimers were right outside. Elias turned to face Syria, his expression serious. "Get ready. When they step in, hit them with everything you've got." Syria's heart was still racing, but now there was something different in her chest. She wasn't alone anymore. The human beside her, broken and scarred, had a plan, and for the first time, she realized that they might actually survive this. The Reclaimers had come to end her life, but Elias, with his traps and his quiet defiance, was about to show them that humans fought in ways the Dominion would never understand. And in that moment, Syria Valk realized this wasn't just survival, this was rebellion. The hidden weapon. The bunker's walls groaned under the pressure of the storm outside, but within the cold, dimly lit space, a different kind of storm was brewing. The Reclaimers were closing in, their relentless pursuit a dark promise of death. But Elias wasn't afraid. He moved through the bunker with a calmness that bordered on eerie, as though he had already anticipated this moment long before it arrived. Sirius sat against a wall, her body still aching from the previous battles, her mind spinning with thoughts she couldn't silence. She had been ready to die in the desert, abandoned by her own people, her own army. Yet here she was, not only alive but standing at the edge of a new kind of war, a war she had never imagined humans could fight. She watched Elias as he moved, picking through piles of old tech, discarded parts, and forgotten weapons. The sound of his footsteps was soft but deliberate, like a man who had spent years in places far worse than this. The man didn't speak much, but Syria could see it in his actions. He wasn't just surviving, he was building something bigger than himself. "What are you doing?" Syria asked, her voice hoarse from the dust and strain. Elias didn't look up at first, his hands working quickly with wires and scrap metal, his movements fluid despite the urgency in the air. But then he paused, glancing at her over his shoulder with that same quiet smile he had worn ever since she met him. "Something the Dominion won't see coming," he said simply. Syria narrowed her eyes. The Dominion had always thought themselves infallible. Their soldiers were perfect. Their technology advanced beyond anything the humans had ever seen. But Elias wasn't trying to outmatch them with superior strength. He was doing something far more dangerous. He was using their arrogance against them. Elias pulled a large, battered device from the corner, one Syria couldn't immediately recognize. The hum of the bunker's ancient machinery seemed to fade into the background as he began connecting wires to the device. She watched, her curiosity piqued, as he worked with an intense focus, muttering to himself as if recalling steps from a long-forgotten memory. "This," Elias said, turning to face her with a glint of pride in his eyes, "is a human defense system, built from the wreckage of wars the Dominion doesn't even remember. They think they've erased us, but we never forget, and when they come for us again, we'll remind them how wrong they are." Syria felt a chill run down her spine as the meaning of his words sank in. He wasn't just hiding, he wasn't just running. Elias was preparing for something much bigger, something that would shake the Dominion to its core. He finished assembling the device, his hands quick but steady, and with a final twist he locked it into place. The device hummed to life, its screen flickering as it powered up. For a moment, Syria wasn't sure what she was looking at. It was a collection of old tech, scavenged parts, and forgotten systems, but Elias had made it into something far more deadly. "What is it?" she asked, her voice low. Elias glanced at her, his eyes dark with the knowledge of what was coming. "It's a beacon. A signal, the kind that can make the Dominion think there's a human colony here." Syria blinked. "A colony? You're trying to make them think there's an entire settlement here? Do you realize what they'll do when they find out it's a trap?" Elias shrugged, the same grin tugging at the corners of his mouth. "They'll come in force, and when they do, they'll realize the planet isn't as dead as they thought. They'll think they've got everything under control, but they won't." Syria's mind raced. The Dominion would be on high alert, their scanners tracking every signal, every movement, but they had no idea what Elias had planned. He was luring them into a trap, into something they wouldn't be prepared for. Suddenly, the low hum of the scanner Elias had been using began to beep rapidly. The signal was picking up, fast. Syria felt a jolt of panic, but Elias remained calm. "The Dominion's here," he said quietly, "and they're already starting to map energy signatures. We don't have much time." Syria glanced at the screen. Sure enough, the Dominion's probe was already in the vicinity, its high-tech sensors sweeping the area. If they found the signal, they would know something was wrong.
They'd come in full force, ready to eliminate any threat. But Elias wasn't done, not by a long shot. "Do it," Syria said, her voice steady despite the growing urgency in the air. Elias smiled, the look in his eyes sharper now. "I already did it." He activated the beacon, sending the signal out into the void. It was a faint pulse at first, but it grew stronger, its signal echoing through the space. Syria could feel the change in the air as the system powered up. The hum grew louder, more intense, and for a moment, it felt like the whole bunker was alive with the energy of something old and forgotten, something human. The Dominion's probe paused for a moment, its path changing as it adjusted to the new signal. The high-tech ship had locked onto their location. Elias had tricked them, and now the hunt had begun. Syria's mind raced, but there was no turning back now. The Dominion was coming, and they would bring their full might on this planet. They would come for the humans they thought were weak, but what they didn't know was that humans weren't weak at all. They were survivors, and Elias just showed Syria that the real fight was only beginning. "We've got their attention," Elias said, his voice steady as ever. "Now we wait." Syria's chest tightened as the magnitude of their plan hit her. The trap was set, but what would happen when the Dominion finally understood what Elias had done? The silence in the bunker was broken by the distant, ominous hum of Dominion ships approaching, and Syria knew that whatever happened next, they had crossed a line that could never be undone. The Dominion would come, but this time they wouldn't just be fighting to win, they'd be fighting to survive. And that, Syria realized, was where the true battle lay. The final stand. The silence in the bunker was thick, almost suffocating as a distant rumble of Dominion ships grew louder. Every minute, the low hum of their engines reverberated through the walls, a constant reminder of the deadly force that was approaching. Elias had triggered the beacon, a signal that would draw the Dominion right into the heart of their trap. Now all they could do was wait, but there was no peace in waiting, only a sense of inevitability, a storm on the horizon that could not be outrun.
Syria stood by the makeshift window, her eyes fixed on the flickering stars above, but her thoughts were elsewhere. The pain in her side was growing more intense by the minute, a reminder that she wasn't the soldier she once was. Her body was weaker, slower, and every breath felt like a struggle. Yet her mind was sharp, focused on the task ahead. The Dominion wouldn't give up. They never did. They had written her off once, but now they would come back for her, for them both. "Can you feel it?" Elias's voice broke through the tension in the air. Syria turned to see him at the console, his hands moving swiftly as he adjusted the tracking systems, his brow furrowed in concentration. The room was dim, lit only by the flickering glow of old human technology. But in that light, Elias seemed more like a shadow than a man. Tired, battle-worn, but unyielding. "I feel the weight of their ships," she replied, her voice steady. "They're not here for us alone. They're here to erase the last traces of human resistance." Elias glanced at her, a slight grin tugging at the corner of his mouth. "And they'll fail. Again." He wasn't wrong. Despite the overwhelming odds, there was something in the way he said it, something that told Syria he wasn't just trying to convince her. He believed it. He had faith in their ability to turn this around, to survive in ways the Dominion couldn't possibly understand. The control panel hummed, and the screen blinked with a sudden surge of data. The Dominion fleet had entered orbit, their formations precise, their weapons ready. They were sweeping the area for any signs of human activity, but they hadn't yet realized what they had walked into. Sirius stepped closer, her eyes scanning the readouts on the screen. "They think they have us cornered. They think they know the layout of this place." "They think they know everything," Elias said, his fingers flying over the controls. "But they don't. This place isn't just a bunker. It's a tomb for anyone who underestimates human ingenuity." Sirius' gaze flickered to the nearby weapons cache, the old rifles, the scattered ammo. There were no fancy gadgets here, no advanced Dominion tech, just old, battered machines that had been discarded and forgotten. But Elias had turned them into something far more dangerous than any of the Dominion's elite soldiers could comprehend. This wasn't a battle of power. This was a battle of survival.
The first wave of Dominion soldiers descended, their boots hitting the ground with military precision. But when the door to the bunker slammed open, it wasn't the overwhelming force of an army that met them. It was the unexpected, the chaos. The first reclaimer stepped through the doorway, his red visor glowing ominously, his body clad in adaptive armor that shimmered like oil. He moved with eerie calmness, but his first step onto the trap Elias had set sent a shockwave of electricity through his body. The reclaimer jerked, his armor sparking as the electricity coursed through him, throwing him off balance. Syria's heart pounded in her chest. She had expected a brutal assault, but instead, the Dominion was already playing into their hands. The first reclaimer didn't even have time to recover before the second and third ones entered, but this time they hesitated. Elias had prepared for this. The traps were working, just as he had planned. The reclaimers were confused, thrown off balance by something they hadn't prepared for: human unpredictability. Elias didn't wait for them to recover. He was already moving, sliding into the shadows, his rifle raised. Syria followed suit, grabbing her own weapon, feeling the weight of it in her hands. It wasn't a tool of power. It was a tool of resistance. The reclaimers opened fire, their weapons deadly and precise, but the old bunker's walls were thick and their shots ricocheted off the metal, creating sparks and chaos. For a moment, Syria felt alive again. Alive in a way she hadn't since the days when she was a commander, leading soldiers into battle. She wasn't just running anymore, she was fighting. Elias fired back, his shots aimed at weak points in the reclaimer's armor. Each bullet didn't pierce, but it made them falter, made them hesitate, and that was all they needed. The fight was close, brutal. The reclaimers were powerful, but they were too confident. They had underestimated the strength of a human mind, the strength of survival. Then the second wave came. The Dominion had sent reinforcements, more soldiers, more power. The bunker trembled under the weight of their attack, but Elias didn't flinch. He was already moving, his hands working with the frantic speed of someone who knew the clock was ticking. Syria felt the tension rise in her chest. The reclaimers were no longer backing down. They were focused now, their movements calculated and precise. Elias had given them a window of opportunity, but they had to act fast. Elias grabbed a device from the table, one last piece of old human tech, and set it down in the middle of the room. "Get ready," he said, his voice calm but with an edge. "This is the last card." The device hummed to life, its small lights blinking rapidly. The ground shook, the walls groaned as the human defense grade activated, sending waves of kinetic energy into the room, forcing the reclaimers back. The reclaimers were pinned, their weapons useless against the unexpected chaos that surrounded them. Syria stood tall, her breathing heavy but steady. The pain in her side no longer mattered. She was alive, and now the Dominion was going to learn just how far humans would go to survive. "They're retreating," Elias said with a grin, his eyes sharp with focus. "They're scared." Syria watched as the reclaimers began to withdraw, their movements hesitant, unsure. For the first time since the battle began, the Dominion was the one that had been cornered. The ground trembled again, but this time it wasn't the Dominion closing in. It was the hum of victory. The war wasn't over, but the first fight had been won. And in that moment, Syria Valk realized that the Dominion had no idea what they were up against, because they had never faced humans who refused to surrender. A new beginning. The sounds of the retreating Dominion fleet echoed through the cold, barren sky, their ships disappearing into the blackness of space. But in the bunker below, there was no triumph, no victory celebration, only the hum of machinery and the distant echoes of war. The battle had been won, but the war was far from over. Syria stood in front of the large map display, her fingers tracing the blinking red dots on the screen. The Dominion was pulling back, but they were already regrouping, sending new ships, new forces. They had failed once. They wouldn't make that mistake again. Syria knew that, as sure as she knew her own name. The Dominion didn't forgive weakness. They didn't forgive failure. But she wasn't thinking about the Dominion anymore. Her mind wasn't on the inevitable retaliation. Her thoughts were with the man standing behind her, the human that had turned everything she knew upside down. Elias ran. The bunker was still, the air heavy with anticipation. Elias was at the control panel, scanning the signals and adjusting the systems, his face illuminated by the faint glow of the monitors. He didn't speak, but I knew he was calculating, preparing. It's what he did. It's what humans did. Adapt, survive, and fight when everything else said they should surrender. She could feel the weight of her decision pressing on her chest. The Dominion had abandoned her once, left her to die in the desert. And now, standing here with Elias, with the weight of the universe pressing down on her, she realized something she had never considered before. The choice had always been hers. She had chosen to fight when others would have given up, and now she had to choose again. "Elias," Syria said, her voice steady but tinged with something else, something she hadn't felt in years. Fear, maybe, or hope. "We can't keep running. They'll come again, and this time they won't make the same mistakes." Elias turned from the console, his expression grim. "I know." There was no question in his voice, no doubt. He was ready for whatever came next. "I can't do this alone," Syria whispered. The words felt strange coming out of her mouth. She had always been a leader, a commander, strong, independent. But standing here with Elias, with the weight of the universe pressing down on her, she realized the truth. She couldn't do it alone. She didn't have to. "You don't have to," Elias said, his voice calm but fierce. "You've already made the hardest decision. You're still standing, and that's what counts. Now we fight together." Syria's eyes locked with his, the man who had once been a stranger to her, now standing as her ally, her partner. They were both warriors in their own right, but together they were something more. They were a force that Dominion hadn't prepared for. They were the spark that could ignite a fire. The ground beneath them rumbled as the Dominion's new forces arrived, their ships cutting through the atmosphere like knives through the sky. But Syria didn't feel fear, not anymore. She felt something else, a sense of purpose, a sense of unity. Elias pulled out a small device, an old human signal jammer. He activated it, and the faint buzzing in the air stopped. "The fleet's already on its way. We've got one chance to make them think we're just a small resistance, a few scattered survivors." Syria raised an eyebrow. "And how do we do that?" Elias's grin widened, a glimmer of mischief in his tired eyes. "We make them think they're winning.
We give them the illusion of control." Syria felt a flicker of understanding, but she didn't speak. She just watched as Elias moved with purpose, his hands swift and sure. He was preparing something that could turn the tide of this war before the Dominion even knew what hit them. "I've got a few tricks left," Elias said, his voice low, "but we'll need your help. The Dominion thinks they can erase us, but we're not done. Not yet." The map on the wall flickered, the red dots expanding as more Dominion ships moved into position. They had fallen for their own trap once, they wouldn't fall for it again. This time, it was Elias and Syria who would make the rules. Syria's hand rested on the control panel, her fingers hovering over the old human tech. She had once believed that loyalty to the Dominion was everything, that obedience was strength. But now, as she stood here beside a human, her former enemy, she realized that true strength wasn't in loyalty to a broken system. It was in the courage to stand up and fight when everyone else said you couldn't. "We fight like humans," Syria said softly, a smile tugging at her lips. "We survive by making them fear what they don't understand." Elias's grin mirrored hers. "Exactly. Now let's remind them." The plan was simple but dangerous. They would use the Dominion's own tactics against them, weaving a web of false signals and decoys, drawing them into a trap. The Dominion was used to controlling the battlefield, but they hadn't faced a human who thought like Elias. They hadn't faced a human who knew how to turn everything they knew upside down. As Elias activated the final stage of the plan, the bunker shook again. The Dominion fleet was descending on them, unaware of the storm they were about to walk into. "This is it," Elias said, his eyes locked on Syria. "Are you ready?" Syria nodded, her heart steady. She was no longer the commander of the Viral Dominion. She was something else now. Something that would make the Dominion question everything they thought they knew. The final fight had begun, and this time it wasn't about survival. It was about defiance. It was about making the Dominion understand that no matter how many times they tried to erase humanity, there was one thing they could never destroy:
the spirit of those who refuse to surrender. Above Karen 9, the sky darkened as the Dominion ships locked into their formation. But below, in the heart of the bunker, Elias and Syria prepared to send a message that would echo across the stars, a message the Dominion would never forget. "Let's show them what happens when humans decide to stand together," Elias said, and Syria felt a fire ignite within her. This wasn't just a battle. This was the beginning of a new war, one that would change everything. And the Dominion wouldn't